Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce to you our next guest speaker, Dr. Yvonne Anderson. She was and is active as researcher and earned a PhD at the University of Southampton. She was a senior manager at the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services before becoming National Director for Children's Mental Health of the United Kingdom. In this capacity, she led national programs on partnership facilitation, workforce planning, camps to adult transition, and participation, turning what young people say into what services do. In 2008, Dr. Anderson established CERNIS with the goal of improving public services, especially those concerning the health of children and young people. CERNIS works with public and voluntary sector staff and clients to develop systems, processes, and products that support service improvement. In 2010, she started to develop the Mind of My Own app, as well as Well-Informed, a web-based service about young people's mental health for professionals without mental health training. Since 2015, Dr. Anderson is director of Mind of My Own, that makes technology for products with an emphasis on getting the voice of service users heard and acted upon. Dear colleague, you have the floor.
I just put my timer on. Thank you very much. I'm delighted and honoured. Thank you, Your Majesty, and colleagues and friends of all ages here today for inviting me. I must make one small correction. I was only the director of a national mental health charity for the UK, so others had the honour of being directors of the whole of children's mental health. So why did I choose pies? Well, think. Butter, flour, sugar, apples, nice. But when we put them together, they make something wonderful. All cultures have pies, and pies are wonderful. They're prized by every cuisine. Similarly, the benefits that I have noted in my career to children of participating at all sorts of different levels are physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. Pies is pies is an easy way to remember. But when you put those things together, they add up to more than the sum of their parts, and that becomes wonderful as well. So that's what I'd like to speak to you about today. Ooh. Could be because I was pressing the wrong button. So thank you very much for your introduction. I'm going to elaborate a little so that you kind of know where I'm coming from today. So my first attempts at participation were with so-called troubled adolescents. That was the label given to them at the time in 1981. It was my second job. I was 4 years away from having graduated. I say I attempted participation because I didn't really know what it was, but I had a gut feeling that these so-called troubled young people needed to be engaged and involved in their care. It's important to say that I was partially successful. I also failed, and failure is important. Now I build software, and I know how important failure is for learning and making you stronger. And the lessons I learned there in that first participation role lasted my whole life. So then I went with the same group of people into a different environment, into further education, and participated with so-called difficult young people. They were non-traditional students in an educational establishment. I adapted my teaching. I had an epiphany moment where, if there are teachers here or people who speak regularly, you'll know that your ego can grow a little bit when you have this privileged position to be here. You can become quite theatrical. You have the audience in your hands. You know, that's great and it's very gratifying. But I realized as a teacher and an educator, I had to become something different. and not hold the floor and hold the court in the classroom, but engage and involve the students and the learners in what we were doing together on a learning journey. So I started participating there. I then, my doctoral thesis was participating with 11 different countries to try to work out what are the ingredients when people have no common language and no common culture. What are the ingredients to get them to work together? How do we all participate? And resulted in my thesis. I took those ideas to the NHS and worked with professionals, children and parents in a participatory manner. And then worked with individual people and groups of children in Cernus, which was my first company. I became known to some colleagues in Belgium as a result of a project that was part of something very close to what Professor Saab just described that we did in the UK. It was a transformation of the whole of children's and young people's mental health. And somebody with vision in the government recognised that participation should be a core element alongside every other element of transforming those services. And I won the contract to lead that participation. I then, as you kindly said, founded a digital tool. It enables children to participate in their lives in a way that suits them. And it helps them find the language and it gives them the tools for doing so. Now, did I do all of that on my own? No. Lots of other people, not just young people and children we were participating with, but lots of other adults have been part of that journey. And I've often led projects, but I'd put that down to being the eldest child. I think we have a tendency to have to lead. But, you know, this is a collaborative venture. So today's not about me. I'm here to represent all the adults and young people who've worked together to make participation something good. I've learned this, and I agree with this statement 100%. Children are much more capable than we think they are. We have to find the ways to help them show that. This was cited in Lundy's book of 2007. I know that the Lundy model is one that I think is going to be taken up in Belgium. I commend it. It's simple. And it's based on the notion that participation is a human right. It's our right as adults and it's our right as children. It's enshrined in the Human Rights Act as well as in, obviously, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. But for us to enact those rights of young people and children, we adults have requirements upon us. We have to be ready. We have to open ourselves up. And this, in a way, goes against the training that we have as professionals. We have to stop being the expert all the time. We have to understand we will hear things we don't want to hear. We will be challenged. We have to have ways of dealing with that. We have to be coaches and mentors and sometimes advocates for the young people we're participating with because they will not always have the skill they need to be able to participate. So we have to help them get to a place where they can participate. And we have to view the children as citizens. They're not just adults in the making. Participation means everyone's a citizen, everybody. In my current role as director of this software company, one of the apps we make is for younger children to be helped with an adult, but nonetheless a younger child or a child with learning disability or additional needs. We know of children as young as 2 years old who are capable of using that app on a tablet to indicate, this is what I want. This is where I feel safe. This is what makes me happy. This is what makes me sad. 2, 3 years old. And then with the other app that they can use on their own, we know of children from the age of 7 who have reported, this is happening in my life. I want to tell you about it. I want to talk more. So we have to see children as more capable than we thought they were. And we need to share our power. And sometimes it's power that we didn't even realize that we had. And we didn't realize how much we had. If we open up our hearts and minds to hear what children and young people have to say, they will tell us what it feels like to be on the other side of that power, and they'll help us share it. But if we're serious about children being able to exercise their human right to participate in all areas that affect their lives, which is all areas of life, then these are the things as adults that we need to do. So, what exactly are these benefits then? Let's not forget there are benefits to us. I have benefited hugely from all the participation programs I've been involved in with young people. And there are benefits to institutions as well. So in the national program that was mentioned, which I led, which was part of the CAMS Child and Adolescent Mental Health Transformation, institutions like hospitals, health trusts and so on benefited from understanding a whole lot more about the children they were providing services to. They allowed children to critique them. They allowed children to help with recruitment of therapists and other staff, managers. And as a result, they reported that they were a stronger organisation. The professionals benefited, even though at first they were very reluctant. Because, you know, they thought, well, children won't want to participate with us. They won't want to do the things we do. They won't want to come to our meetings. And we said, well, why don't we look at how the meetings work and ask young people what would make it work for them? And the outcome was the meetings were changed by virtue of what young people said they would be able to take part in meaningfully. And at the end, the professionals in the meetings said they're better for us as well. So by making the meetings simpler, with language that was explained, with just a short number of papers to get through, a manageable agenda, with break times factored in, not only did we have children and young people participating fully in big decisions, but also the professionals agreed, although they'd been reluctant at the beginning, they benefited. Parents and carers benefit, because when children are participating, even if it's only at the micro level in their own care, they become more informed. That's part of their intellectual growth. They become more informed about their own issues and problems. They talk them through with a therapist or another professional on an equal basis. They share the responsibility of setting goals and trying to reach them. And this helps their parents in turn to understand and to be more engaged in the young person's recovery if it's a mental health issue. So these things we found as part of that large project. I would say that I was having these sorts of conversations at least 20 years ago. 20 years ago, people in the audience, if it came to questions, would say, well, this is just your anecdote. This is just you. You made this happen, and it's, you know, just the people you've dealt with. But now, fortunately, in the last 20 years, we've had an explosion of research into the benefits of participation of children and young people. Much of it has an international flavour, but all of it is transferable into the settings in which we work. I decided not to use this 20 minutes of precious time to go through all of that literature, because I guess most of my colleagues in this room are very accustomed to doing literature reviews. You can find it, or I will happily share the literature that I have. But it backs up what people like myself and others like me had observed and heard from young people ourselves, that participation in and of itself is beneficial. What's incredible to me is on this national project that we're talking about, we did a number of things. We had to support children and young people at the micro level being engaged more in their own care. We also, as a national team, had to support children and young people participating in their communities and in their services at, let's say, a meso level. But at the macro level where we were working on behalf of the government, we took a decision right at the beginning that we would work in partnership with young people on our team. So we recruited them through a normal recruitment process. They were all children who had a mental health issue. and who were using mental health services. Because it was national and they had to travel and do things alone, they had to be teenagers. It couldn't be young children. At the beginning, those young people aged from 15 upwards, most of them had never left their hometown, unless to go on holiday abroad, maybe. They'd never been on a train on their own. They'd never been to London. London is vast. They hadn't ever been trusted or had the expectation that they would do something on their own and take responsibility. We joined them together. We had an induction and an intensive training program. Suffice it to say, in years 2, 3, and 4 of that project, that group of young people were started by being coached and mentored by us, went through working with us as equals in partnership, and then took over much of the program. They chaired the policy groups at a national government level in the NHS, so they contributed actively to policy that we have now for children's mental health. They ran their own national conference, not just a conference for children, a conference for the same sort of conference that we're at today, this symposium. They organised and ran it. They had the ear of government ministers. So in that period, they grew in stature. And when we say the effects of participation are physical, when they pitched up on the first day, some of them were a bit overweight. They were all reported that they'd never had to get up at that time of the day before because they were quite reclusive, didn't go to school. They'd missed, years of schooling, as children in mental health services sometimes do. By the end of the program, they stood tall. They could talk to an audience like this. They could talk one-to-one to another adult as an equal, and still, of course, have all the interests of young people, naturally. Physically, they changed. Intellectually, they just grew beyond expectation. So having missed so much education, they had begun a bit resigned to, well, maybe I might get to university, I probably won't. But all the ones who wanted to went to university in a beautiful role reversal. 2 of them are now, one's just completed her master's degree, the other has been accepted for a PhD. They have together managed to get a publishing deal. And they contacted me about 6 months ago and said, we're editing a book on participation. Do you want to be a contributor? Wow, how marvelous is that? I mean, that's not just intellectual, it's everything. And, I know that you could be sitting there thinking, well, that was all very well for that little group of young people who got that amazing opportunity. But genuinely, you can track that down the levels. Not all young people want to do work at that level. Not all of them will be able to. But all young people throughout that program had the opportunity to participate at different levels suited to them. And they all showed those sorts of benefits. So I wanted to just quickly share the very brief stories of 3 other young people who weren't on this program, who I worked with in recent years. I've changed their names and other details. So Theo pitched up in my office. He had hair that covered his face, literally. He shambled in and stood like that. He was painfully shy. I didn't see his face for the whole day. We put together a program of participation with Theo and some other people. 6 months later, he had built me a wiki site. He had previously known nothing about technology. And he sailed out of the door and went, bye, Yvonne, I'm off, He had a new haircut and a new persona. It was extraordinary and wonderful. Charlotte, she pitched up. I'd met her in somewhere there where I was doing participation with a group, and she asked if she could come and see me, so she came to my office, as I then had in central London. It was summer. She had all the visible signs of self-harm, all the way up her arms. She was shy. We talked a little. We thought about the opportunities that I might be able to give to her. At the end of that meeting, when she was to go home, she said, do you know, this is the first time I've had a meeting like this where I didn't leave in an ambulance to the hospital. I mean, by the way, I'm not medically trained. I'm not even a psychologist. So I was somewhat alarmed at that. But she'd already, in one meeting, when we were talking possibilities of stuff she could do, responsibilities she could take, she was already beginning to think of herself as a healing person. She stopped going into crisis. She stopped going to A&E. I'm not claiming the credit for that. She also had some very, very great therapy. But I think participation helped her choose the right therapy for her because she'd had lots of failed therapy before that. She's now a very successful professional and a triathlete. And then finally, Michael, who participated in some projects of mine. He was overweight, had a chronic illness. He'd been very badly let down by adults, including therapists, couldn't trust his therapist, so couldn't be able to benefit from what therapy could give him. He couldn't stick at anything for very long. He was very flighty and would do something for 5 minutes and get bored. Over a period of time, his participation, not just with me, but with other colleagues of mine, led him finally, after having said that he would never make university, he hadn't got any A-levels or anything, he did a home study course that suited his way of being, and finally graduated, and he's now a social worker. All of these people just show what success you can have. Participation wasn't the only thing helping them towards success, but my questioning of them and my interactions with them, they have stated clearly, the ones in the project, my mental health improved when I was participating in that project. I just find that phenomenal. Those who've gone on for their own careers in mental health and understand it very well have said, alongside my therapy, it was the two prongs, the twin prongs, that helped me recover. I never expected to hear that from somebody in participation. But sometimes when we think about what participation, I just have to switch this off, really means, then, should we be so surprised? Oh, I should have. Okay, I won't go back because my time's up. But very quickly, the 5 ways to well-being. I don't know if people in Belgium are familiar with it. It's quite popular in Britain. It's a body of evidence that just says if people connect, if they continually learn, if they engage in physical activity of any description, they will have positive mental health. And of course, participation offers them all of those possibilities. Pies. Those benefits happen because participation is purposeful. Children and young people have a purpose in their lives, something outside of themselves. They have responsibility. They become influential. They see that decisions are made that they had a hand in and that things change as a result of them participating. They become empowered and they develop incredible skills. They are our citizens, not just of tomorrow, but of today. I think you are going to embark on a participation journey in Belgium. I hope so. I wish you the best of luck. Open up your hearts and your minds and everything will follow. Voila.